Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining Bright Horizons for a webinar all about being a family caregiver for your older loved ones. My name is LaDonna, and before we get started with our content today, I would like to take a few moments to review housekeeping. All right, so we have an interactive event planned for you, and we hope you can take full advantage. So first, we have a chat room. It is open. The chat room is where you can share ideas, tips, and stories with each other. We have hundreds of folks on the webinar today, so please feel free to put any ideas in the chat. To access the chat room, you just click on the blue widget with the chat bubbles or the blue button with the chat bubbles, and you'll be able to just type in your thoughts there. And we also have a few polls or a couple polls for you today. We definitely encourage you to participate. Results are anonymous, but they'll also help you get to know one another on the webinar today, so please feel free to participate there. We have collected some of the questions that you posted as you registered for the webinar, and if we have time, we'll address a couple of them at the end. And if you have other questions as the webinar progresses today, please feel free to either put them in the chat window or you can actually put them right in the Q&A, purple Q&A button. We also ask that you use the purple Q&A widget for technical assistance. So if you can't hear, if you can't see the slides, anything like that, just please feel free to put your technical issue in the purple Q&A widget. We have tech folks on standby who can help. Finally, we have a number of resources available for you today in the resources widget. You can access that at any time and download or visit the websites that we've made available to you, but you will also receive them via email along with a recording link to listen to this webinar later. So with housekeeping out of the way, I'd like to introduce very quickly our speakers today. So first, we are very pleased to welcome Charlene New. She's our special guest today. She's a Senior Client Care Manager and Senior Advisor for Mature Caregivers, which is an organization that partners with Bright Horizons and offers caregiving advice and services. So welcome, Charlene, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
And I'm also very pleased to introduce you to today's webinar moderator, Andrea Wicks-Bull. She's a senior consultant for global initiatives at Bright Horizons, or specifically Bright Horizons Workforce Consulting. And she's also our resident elder care expert with personal caregiving experience. So we're very pleased to have her today. And actually with that, Andrea, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Sounds good. Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. This promises to be a really rich conversation, and you'll hopefully walk away with some great insights as to how to move forward in your own lives and that of your older loved one. But as we get started, we often like to begin by understanding who's participating in this webinar. So I would ask you to think about an older loved one, if you're a current caregiver, think about someone you love in general. How would you describe your current caregiving role? So this will be our first poll. Take a moment, make your selection. Would you say that you're caring for an older parent, spouse, or other relative right now? Or that you're not a caregiver now, but plan to be and probably will be in the near future? Perhaps you're just thinking ahead of possible family caregiving responsibilities, or in your heart of hearts, you really don't think you have caregiving responsibilities anytime soon. So you've got 4 choices, and let's see where we land. All right. Everybody make their selection? Well, it looks like most of you on the call are current caregivers, and that's wonderful, and obviously that's something we would expect. But a number of you are also thinking ahead, and that's our sweet spot as well. So let's get started. Charlene, I'm really excited to work with you.
And I'm excited to work with you too, Andrea.
Great. Let's go through this agenda briefly. We're going to begin with what we call the basics and spend some time making sure we're all on the same page when we think about what a caregiver is. Then we'll dive into some logistics and explore the different service options and ways of thinking about all the different areas of focus surrounding caregiving as well as the needs of older loved ones. We do want to take a moment and acknowledge the emotions associated, both the emotions of the caregiver as well as the older loved one who is experiencing it in this stage in their lives. And then we'll wrap with a recognition around the importance of self-care. And if we have time, we'll take additional questions. So do spend a moment and send in your comments in the chat box so we can address those as well if we don't touch it. So let's begin with the basics. Now, to set the stage, I think it's really important that we understand what a caregiver really is. So, Charlene, perhaps you can give us the big picture.
Sure. So the Family Caregiver Alliance defines caregiving as the caring for someone that's in your life and you're responsible for their care. And that can be from a formal, and so in my professional role as a care manager, I'm a caregiver, and I help families figure out their caregiving needs and resources available. And then in the informal role, which many of you are involved in, which is you're caring for your parent, I'm also an informal caregiver for my mom. So why is it, what's the big deal about being a caregiver? It's hard. It can be gratifying, but it's just what it is. It's difficult. There's role changes between, if you're in a parental situation, between you and your parent. Coordinating care. For those of you who are involved in this, you know how hard it is sometimes to leave the house to make sure that everything's okay with the person that you love that is in need of assistance. It's emotional, and there's so much to know. How can you possibly know everything there is to know about caregiving when that's not your job? Yeah. And there may be cognitive issues resulting in changes in personality, again, for somebody that you love who is a completely different person now because of implications from a disease.
Well, so really for today, the purpose of today's call, caregiving really is having responsibility for an older loved one, keeping in mind they might be in your hometown, they might be cross-country, they might be in another country. It could be mom and dad, it could be your mother-in-law, and of course it could be your favorite aunt. The whole idea of having some sense of responsibility, that's what we're going to speak to this afternoon. And as we think about it, there's a layer also associated with the fact that many of these caregivers are in fact working caregivers. In addition, take a look. The majority of working caregivers are caring for someone who is over 65 years of age, but not exclusively. Clearly, it could be caring for someone who has developmental disabilities. There's also a high percentage, just under a half, that are currently in the sandwich generation. So take a minute and send us a chat. Are you in the sandwich generation? What that means, you have responsibility for an older loved one, as we've described, but it also means you have someone under 18 living with you and looking to your parental leadership. That adds an extra spice to the conversation. And the last is this high percentage of individuals, older adults with dementia. And that does also add another spin to the discussion. Charlene, do you see that a lot in your practice?
All the time. People are wondering how they can go to work, how there can be somebody who's taking great care of a person they love, how they take care of themselves, how they take care of their families, and how they put it all together. It is a constant issue with people about how do you deal with this very difficult situation and still care for the person you love.
Absolutely. So now let's get into the logistics. I do have to say at Bright Horizons we deal with all of these challenges, but that sandwich generation has a special place in our heart. So we want to be sure to give some insights on that as we go through the day. Okay, so the reason we have a logistics category is the complexity of caring for an older loved one. In the U.S., elder care services or supports to adults is very decentralized. And so what we hope to do is to give you categories and approaches to thinking about all the different areas of focus and then give you some ways of approaching your older loved one with a way to determine what needs to happen. So, Charlene, let's dive into the complexities of the logistics.
Great. So first of all, one of the most common things that we talk about is caregiving.
Absolutely.
Who gives care?
Who's giving the care? So let's begin, though, by finding out the priorities of our participants, okay? So here's our second poll. Which issue area are you most concerned about now or in the future as a caregiver? Those of you that are current caregivers, you may have personal experience. Those of you that see it down the road, you may just pick a category that you've heard a lot about. But what are your issue areas? Is it health? Or is it the financial implications of caregiving? And is it the housing questions for older loved ones? Perhaps it's all about the legal questions. And obviously, the importance of the communication, having those conversations. Which area of focus? Let's see how we're doing. 5 more seconds. 4. All right. It looks like, looks like the majority of you are focused on health. Each category has a place. Legal, not so much. Well, we're still going to touch on it because there are a number of things you got to know. And, of course, financial as well. I think we'll start with health. Charlene,
Great.
Why don't you paint a picture around the questions of health?
Sure. I was watching the results and am not surprised that health came first, financial second, and then communication came in third because those are the top 3 hard areas to deal with. So on the health, it's trying to figure out what kind of care does your parent need, who can provide it, how can it be provided, can it be done by you, or do you need to have a professional do it? And one of the things that you really need to focus on is, are there cognitive or physical issues that really require a professional to provide some assistance, especially with family members who have Alzheimer's or Parkinson's, which are cognitive diseases, and in many cases require a lot of instruction on how to communicate, how to work with people whose personalities are changing in different ways. I ask that you think about what you can do versus what you want to do. And I think that you sometimes need to think about using a professional who can help you quarterback the situation and figure out how to do some in-home care or transportation or meals. And what caregiving may mean to one family may be completely different for somebody else.
Absolutely. I think that whole health piece is just natural progression of life. And those of you in the sandwich generation, I would say, every 2 or 3 months, somebody needs a little something, perhaps from the doctor and so forth. But in the context of caring for older relatives, understanding that there are health care implications associated with getting old, and supporting that process for your older relative, whether it is, as Charlene points out, through transportation or coordinating some doctor visits, or maybe just making sure they're speaking to the right professional. The healthcare piece is a major area of focus. In the chat, send us additional comments if there's some other aspects of healthcare that you want to keep in mind. I would also have to underscore, as we think about the logistics of caregiving, remember, it takes a village. So as a caregiver, perhaps your role is making sure mom or dad or your favorite aunt is getting the care they need, but it doesn't necessarily have to be from you. Tapping into your siblings and tapping into the families and relatives that also have a relationship is one way to support this process overall in the long term. Wouldn't you agree, Charlene?
Yes, completely. You should always feel comfortable asking for help. And the more you can involve your siblings, other family members, the better it is for everybody, because it takes some of the onus of the work off of your shoulders, and it helps you put it on the shoulders of other people.
Absolutely. And it keeps those other relationships alive for the older loved one, which is frankly what life is all about. All right, let's move into housing. Housing is a big deal in this country in general. But for older loved ones, the question of housing often is related to their health, their finances, and so forth. So, Charlene, give us an understanding of how to think about the different housing options typically available to older adults.
Sure. So first of all, I would say that you should ask. Ask the older loved one what they want. Don't assume that you already know what they want. In some cases, you may be the person making the decision because they may not be able to make that decision for themselves anymore. But I think from a communication standpoint, asking and not assuming is really important. And those questions can include, where do you want to live? Is that feasible? Is it feasible financially, legally? Are there, different places that make more sense because there's a family member close by? Every state could be different. So you may be in Pittsburgh and your family member may be in Florida, and the living situations may be completely different, both from climate, housing stock, cost of living. But three terms that I'd like to leave you with are aging in place, which means that you've tried to figure out plans for staying at home, and that can mean a continuum of care at home with rehabbing your house to accommodate physical changes that you might have. Congregate housing, in which you're living with different groups of people that you know that are in a household environment.
Is that like a group home for older adults, or
yes.
What's the deal?
Yes, and it tends to be more prevalent in places like Oregon, Washington State, different places.
Okay.
But there is something called the village movement, and the villages are ways to have congregate housing so that people can live together in a household. And then there are group living situations, which you commonly hear, which are called assisted living facilities. And that's where people will help assist you in your daily life. CCRCs, which are continuing care retirement communities, where you go in when you're independent, and if you need to move through the continuum of care from independence to assisted to memory care to skilled nursing, you can live your time there. And there are a number of different websites that you'll find in your resources section, which will give you information on how to find out more information about those.
Well, and I want to go back to this assisted living option. Now, again, all of these are options to think about. It's a conversation with your older loved one, what might make sense. However, if your older loved one is feeling like, I don't need help, thank you very much, and I love being in my home, then that's the aging in place concept. So what are the subtle things you can do with the home to allow that older loved one to remain in the home? This is what we're getting at, is having a better understanding of the different housing options that may be available, and then engaging in a conversation to explore what are their wishes, what would make best sense. The next category we call legal stuff. Oh, it isn't legal, my bad. It's financial. All right, the next category is financial, which is critical, needless to say. Understanding the implications from a financial standpoint is one of those areas where, I don't know, growing up, my parents did not discuss the finances with the children. And now here you are, 58-year-old, and your dad's 82, and it's time to discuss the finances. Charlene, clearly this is a hot button, but the whole caregiving role is somewhat contingent on the financial resources available.
Yes, I would agree, Andrea. I think this is one of the centerpieces that we're talking about that impact housing, legal stuff, and communications. So, again, I want to reiterate, it's important to talk, discuss, don't assume, and there may be tough moments where your parents may have either or your older loved ones may have more than you thought, or they may have less than you thought, which really can impact where they live, how they live, and what their care needs are. I think it's always important to talk about the 4 W's. What do you need for money? When do you need it? So do you need it now? Do you need to keep it in a nest egg, save it for a little while for care down the road? Why do you need it? Do you need it because somebody really can't stay by themselves? Or do you need it because somebody wants to move and you feel like this is the time they can do it. And then how do you pay, and what do you do with that?
And it's interesting to note this financial piece. Oftentimes, I was part of a study, and data suggested a lot of times the men in the household are most likely to make this kind of a connection with an older loved one. So if you have an older brother or an uncle that can have this type of conversation, perhaps that's one way to engage them in this holistic approach to caregiving. Because the financial conversation is not just about how much does mom and dad have at their disposal, but how do they want to spend it and in what ways. But Charlene, aren't there pots of money available to different populations?
Yes. So there are different ways that you can pay for care and for housing. So obviously savings is one option, and that can be in a variety of different places, from annuities to savings accounts to 401ks or pension plans. Reverse mortgages, if you own your own home, that's an option. Long-term care insurance is something that people can start looking into right now. If you're a veteran or you're the spouse of a veteran, there are aid and attendance benefits available. In 2019, Medicare will be paying for some home care visits, but that is still, the regulations are still being written, so I don't have any more information on that. And then Medicaid is also available based on a financial model in states. So for different information on that, I would suggest that you go to the Medicare Medicaid website, CMS Medicare Medicaid, and take a look at the information that they provide you about the different states and about the different programs. Another great place to go is the FDIC, which is when you go to the bank, you know that your money is protected up to a certain amount. They have a great website on financial issues for seniors. And then the National Institute of Health, also in their aging component, also has some great information there that you can take a look at too.
It just sounds like a lot of running around. Are there any shortcuts to dealing with this, or is it really you have to methodically go to all these different websites? One of the things I heard about was some accountants have an expertise in seniors and elder care. Mm-hmm. How do you find one of those? Because then they would at least know all the different pots to access.
Sure. So I think for this particular topic, I think where money can be such a difficult conversation, working with professionals who can have that conversation with a family member, might be a good idea, and it's a good place to go. So the question really is, how do you find that person? You want to make sure that the person is licensed, that they are in good standing with the license, and so you can check with the Secretary of State. You can check with the licensing bureaus in each of your states. And if they have CFP, Certified Financial Planners, that's an option. You could go to your bank. Many times banks have an investment manager who can help you figure out what you need, and your bank will know you if you've got a long-term relationship. And then there's also, at least in Massachusetts, something called the SHINE program, which is serving the health information needs of the elderly, and that will include a component of financial assistance too in figuring out your resources.
Well, and it's funny, I find if there's a great organization, as you pointed out, the SHINE organization in Massachusetts, when in doubt, call them and ask them, what do you suggest for Oklahoma? Because that's where my uncle is, and that's who I'm providing care for. All right, let's move on to the legal side of the house, because we're getting a bunch of questions saying, how do I get my older loved one to move forward in things? What about power of attorney? What's this advance directive? The legal conversation, like the financial conversation, can possibly be difficult. I know with my mom and my dad, we went to a legal attorney with an expertise in elder care law. And there was a very professional approach to having these discussions so that their needs were articulated in such a way that legally it was binding. And that meant a lot both to my mom and my dad. So Charlene, walk us through these documents.
Sure. So as geriatric care manager and gerontologist, I'll be the first to admit I don't know the answers to everything, but between the financial people, the legal people, and different organizations, I think relying on the professionals for some of these questions is a great idea. An elder law attorney, which is a specific type of attorney, deals with a wide range of matters affecting seniors, people with disabilities, and they will help you figure out how to come up with a healthcare proxy, maybe give you some really good suggestions on who would be a good choice and why that would be the case. Long-term care plans. So you could start as soon as you're 65 if you wanted to address the plans that you want to have, especially around financial resources, if you wanted to make sure that you had enough for now, and if you wanted to save those resources for family members as you grow older and pass on. They can help you with applications for Medicaid, which it can be a very time-consuming process. They can also help you with applications for veterans benefits. And they really can really help on complex cases. And complex could mean a difficult financial situation, sometimes family members who aren't always talking to each other, who find it difficult to come to an agreement on different things. It can be somebody who wants to move from point A to point B and needs some resources to be able to do that. The professionals in this case can be really helpful. The power of attorney in which you're giving the ability to monitor your finances and manage your affairs is something that the elder law attorney can draw up. Wills, which pass on your property and your assets and your intentions to people in your life. And the advance directive is the opportunity to say what you want your care to look like and how you would like to be treated. So it's an instruction. It's essentially a set of instructions on what you would like your care to look like.
Well, and how you want the healthcare experience to go.
Yes.
So now all of these are important. Let's go back to this power of attorney piece, because I know as caregivers, sometimes if you have the power of attorney, it can cut through a whole lot of red tape. You can go to your mother-in-law's bank and get answers to those questions because you have the power of attorney. But here's the reality.
Absolutely. I just wanted to say, in getting a power of attorney, make sure that the power of attorney covers everything that you need it to cover. Because
what kinds of things should it cover?
It should cover access to bank accounts. It should cover access to safety deposit boxes, which is not always in a power of attorney. It should cover disbursement of bills. It should cover your ability to talk with the pension boards or Social Security or credit cards about your bills.
And again, so it sounds like the power of attorney is not just a template. You've got to be specific. But here's the bigger question, as if that wasn't big enough. The power of attorney is a document that your older loved one needs to sign and approve. So even though it's a heck of a lot easier for you to have that power of attorney on behalf of your mother-in-law, if your mother-in-law insists on giving power of attorney to her youngest daughter who lives in Florida, those are the realities of caregiving. And I bring this up because, unfortunately, best laid plans don't always happen. And you can do your best helping your older loved one understand power of attorney, advance directive, and the process, but it is ultimately their choice how they move forward and who they want to have those documentations. We're getting a lot of chatter from the chat room, which is wonderful. That's why we do these webinars. And a lot of you are asking, wait a minute, what do I do if I can't get my older loved one to spend money? Now, my dad was Depression era, and I can tell you right now he had no intentions on spending money. And guess what? They had money. I didn't even know they had money until I got power of attorney. That being said, there's an overriding principle. The older loved one is in this stage in their lives, and they have direction. They are the ones who will decide how things should move forward. As a caregiver, your responsibility is to help them understand some of the options, make it easier for them to articulate what it is they want and how they want it to be pursued. And that's why we have a section on emotions, because it rings up a lot of issues for many of us. Any other aspects around the legal piece that we should be mindful of?
I think it's well covered, but I think taking a look at the resources that are available to you, the National Association of Elder Law Attorneys, talking to family and friends, finding somebody who you can have a conversation with is really essential.
Yeah, it genuinely is. You know, one of the questions that we just received is about this health care proxy. Mm-hmm. And I'll confess, the advance directive I understood, but the health care proxy, explain what it is and how we go about getting it.
So the health care proxy gives a family member, friend, elder law attorney, the opportunity to talk with a medical provider about the care, your care. So one of the best ways to give you an example is you go into the hospital. Somebody in your family goes into the hospital, and you call and you say, "How is my uncle doing?" And this is your favorite uncle. You know he loves you more than he loves anybody else, but the nurse at the hospital won't give you an answer. Why? Because you're not the designated healthcare proxy who your uncle has given the ability to be able to get questions answered.
That's right. That's right. It's almost like a power of attorney with regard to the healthcare interface, and it's not even that big of a document. So it is
very short.
So it's one of those things, and we're not trying to overwhelm you all. Hopefully you have a piece of paper and you're just taking notes of certain areas and certain things to focus on. But this healthcare proxy is the kind of thing where your mom could just fill out and list all the folks she's comfortable having that information. It could be the next door neighbor that she's lived next to for the last 20 years.
Absolutely.
Which is great because you live in Los Angeles and you want to call that next door neighbor and say, "How's my mom?" So the healthcare proxy is one of those documents that make it possible for you to get information about how they're doing with regard to the healthcare interface. Because we all know there's, 10 pages of documentation whenever you go to the doctor, and half of it is about HIPAA. Mm-hmm. So that was a really good question. Another question we're getting, Charlene, and I don't know if you've got an answer in your toolkit. What do we do when your mom says, I'm fine. I just am fine, and I appreciate all that you're doing, and I'll definitely get to the power of attorney documents some other time, but I'm not interested in doing that now. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One, being stubborn. Two, maybe being depressed. And three, just feeling like, hey, I'll decide when I'm ready. Mm-hmm. What are your words of wisdom for our participants?
So I would add a fourth category, and that's cognitive impairment. And I think a lot of times, especially around the holidays, many of you might have gone home for the holidays and have observed some changes in the person you love. Could be there was a car accident. Could be that you notice that there's no food in the refrigerator and your dad always had it stocked. There could be a lot of different things. So I think you, in the case of your mom, you really need to be observant and figure out, is what she's telling you really what's happening, and do you really need to try and have a formal assessment of your mom or somebody in your life that you love to make sure that they really are able to say to you, "I'm okay."
Well, but here's the question, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but what I'm hearing, and I've seen it myself, is Mom is okay. Mm-hmm. She still drives to the grocery store, but I'm noticing that she needs more help. I'm getting worried about her. You're telling us that we need to be proactive, but she doesn't want to know. She's not interested in signing documents, and she's not interested when I offer to bring her to an elder law attorney. And I guess, Charlene, and I'm asking the question because you really have decades of experience, it seems to me that it is still the older relative's decision. It just is, in terms of what they want and how they want it. And I feel as a caregiver, you need to respect that. You also personally need to go someplace to get your needs met, because it hurts seeing Mom not making good choices. But there's not much more a caregiver can do at this point except continue to be available and continue to be around, because at some point those options they'll be more amenable to. What do you think?
I think you should be prepared. I think you should be prepared and plan. I think having conversations with your mother or your loved one every quarter to see,
or even sooner. Right. It's kind of like that teenager that doesn't listen, and part of you is like, fine, I'm done, and in your heart of hearts, you can't be done because it's your teenager, and it's kind of along those lines, isn't it?
I think that you don't want to shut the door to communication.
Never.
I think that if you press your loved one too much and they think that you're bossing them around, they're not going to do what you want, and it's not going to work, and it's going to go from a nice conversation to a crisis, and that's never where you want to go. So I think observing, planning, having your own toolkit, and sometimes maybe you're not the person to have the conversation with your parent. Maybe it's somebody else.
Well, that's exactly what that brings us to this emotions category. And I think the reason we began with logistics, because you can now see how complex it can be, yet there are resources out there. Now let's deal with the emotional side of it, because as Charlene points about, in many cases, you may not be the right person to have, quote, that kind of conversation. So take a minute, use the chat box, and share with us what's a word or a phrase that captures how you're feeling about caregiving now or in the future. Again, have in your mind the individual that you have responsibility for, or the one you feel you might in the future, and give us a word or a phrase. And we're just going to take a minute here. Well, you all passed the test. That is the human response. Every time we do this type of question, these are the responses: overwhelmed, exhausted, impatient, feeling guilty, frustrated, feeling empowered, daunted. This is all real, and I don't mean to be cliche, but one of the things we as caregivers need to begin to understand is what you're experiencing is something that millions right now today in the United States are also experiencing it. And if you're in the sandwich generation, it adds an extra layer of cheese. You might enjoy going to childcare and picking up your newborn, and then sort of struggle visiting your mom in the nursing home. And those feelings can get a little complex. Charlene, in your practice, what are some of the issue areas to think about, and what's your reaction to these responses?
So I'm going to respond both as the informal caregiver, which is the caregiver for my mom and being the child, and as a professional, as a geriatric care manager. And the first thing from the personal, I always felt like I want to be the kid. I don't want to be the parent. I want my mom to make these decisions, and I don't know what to do and how to do it. I really had a problem with the change in roles. It was very difficult for me to have to make the decision for my mom, and I felt like that was overwhelming to me, caused me frustration, anger, anxiety, many of the things that all of you are talking about there. Who's going to help me? You know, can I call my sister? Can I ask her to do some things? I felt really guilty when I wouldn't go see her, or I wasn't paying attention, or was pushing her too much. I felt anxiety over trying to juggle my personal, professional, self-care, my mom's life. I felt like, am I doing a good job? Am I not doing a good job? I wanted everything to be better. And I feel like all of these feelings are just something we all face. And but I also get questions from people who say to me, I'm caring for somebody that I don't really like. I don't really want to care for this person, but I'm now in the position of having to do it. Or nobody understands what I'm going through, and nobody wants to listen to me.
We had one respondent say, I think Carolyn says, "Now I'm the mom!" ! And it's sort of like, hey, wait a minute, that's my mommy.
Right.
Oh, no. That reversal of roles can be mighty daunting. I have to say, though, in many towns across the U.S., there are support groups for caregivers. And I'm not much of a support group kind of gal, to be very honest with you. However, that was one category of life experience that I did benefit from, sitting in a room of folks going through the same situation, as long as it was facilitated by somebody who knew what they were talking about. So check in with your libraries, United Way, with your local area agency on aging, with Facebook even, and find out how to access and perhaps participate in an elder care or a caregiver support group, even Twitter. There are ways to get access to the information, and on Facebook and Twitter, it's not even face-to-face, and really get some insights. You'd be surprised the tips to the trade that people can share, but also the opportunity to feel better about it. Because back to that original question, if your mom is not interested in taking your help right now, your mom is not interested in taking your help right now. And so you need to keep your head together so that you can be around when she is ready. To do so, let's move on to self-care. Charlene, you have lots of insights on helping folks keep their own selves together as they assume the role of caregiving. How do you define self-care, and why is it so important?
So I think the thing that always resonates with me when I travel is when I'm on a plane and the flight attendant always says, put on your oxygen mask first before you put on somebody else's. Because taking care of yourself is really something that is of the utmost importance, because you could easily go from being the caregiver to being a care recipient. And that adds a whole other level of stress, obviously, to people. So the idea is to keep yourself healthy in order to keep everybody else healthy, and that's hard. So start small, be focused. Maybe just get up from your desk, take a deep breath, and think about some place that you would rather be. Take a vacation, and that doesn't mean that you have to get on a plane and go to some beautiful paradise. It can be just taking 45 minutes at lunch to just turn off your phone, turn off the thoughts, and just do something good for yourself. You want to be able to do things that you love, that make you feel good, that remind you of laughter and joy and happiness. Shut off your phone. I can't say that enough. It really is good to shut off your phone, especially when you're driving. And I think just remembering that you are so important in this scheme of keeping everything together, that you just need to ask for help.
Well, and I can't underscore that enough. Remember, what we're talking about is caregiving, and it's the role you may be playing, allowing your older loved one to be in this stage in their lives. And it's such a powerful, that's why we did the emotional piece, it's such a powerful role that it can create stress.
Absolutely.
So I think one of the biggest issues caregivers have about self-care is not prioritizing themselves. The fact of the matter is, tomorrow your mom will also have Alzheimer's just like she does today. So if today was a tough day at work, take the night. You don't need to go there tonight. Take some time for yourself, because you totally need to be available down the road. And that's our key message around self-care. There are a number of apps that I've seen also that are pretty cool in terms of the mindfulness. So if you're interested in those sorts of opportunities,
so
do you have a special one?
Headspace is great. There are a lot of great books that are out there that you can tap into. I know that Deepak Chopra and Oprah, I think that I said that correctly, do a series of different meditations. I think it's a great opportunity. There's also a timer that you can do, and they can time and then record how you're progressing in your meditations or how you've backed off of them. But there certainly are a lot of options that are out there.
And I would underscore this whole, let me share with you some data around stress in the U.S., and it's reported from AARP. And I'm doing this because I just don't want those of you who are going through it to feel alone. In fact, 4 in 10 caregivers note feeling highly stressed, and many of you are also working, so it feeds each other in terms of having very little time for yourself. Managing long-term care can also be a form of stress. Half of those who are caring for someone with a form of dementia report feeling emotional stress. I certainly did. I have to say, though, I had a good friend who reminded me, don't go see your mom today. Take a minute. Go tomorrow. You'll be in a better mood. And sure enough, I'd go tomorrow, and my mom would give me a big smile, and I was in a better mood, and I was able to take in the love she was sharing. So, again, we can't underscore it enough. And 45% experiencing physical stress. And that can come from the physicality of caregiving, which I don't think we've touched on at all, Charlene. Do you want to talk to a little bit about what that means?
So caregiving can be both emotional and mental as well as physical. So if your loved one needs assistance getting from, and you're providing the care from a chair to a wheelchair, walking from their house to the car, grocery shopping, carrying in bags. So you may be assisting lifting your parent up and helping them into a car, into the shower, into their bed. You may be moving furniture around. You may be doing grocery shopping and carrying bags. You never know. Again, I go back to saying you can quickly go from being a caregiver to a care recipient if you're not taking care of yourself.
Well, and I think the other part is sometimes when that caregiving responsibility really kicks in, then you're likely to not go to the gym if that's what you used to do, and you can only do 1 hike a week even though you used to do 3, or maybe you're grabbing lunch on the run. There are all sorts of compromises to your normal healthy approach to life. We flag this because if you are mindful that this is the reality, take 2 steps back and figure out if you can let something go and make it easier for you to stay healthy and be good to your body, because this is a long haul, the whole process of caregiving.
It's a marathon, not a sprint, and I think it's important to keep that in mind, that in addition to your caregiving role for the older person in your life, you have a caregiving role for yourself and for your family and for your coworkers and your job and your community. So caregiving encompasses a lot of different roles.
It really does. And one of those is what? A coach, shall we say, in terms of getting those siblings on board. So we're hearing a lot of chatter about what the heck do we do to engage our siblings. I was in New Jersey with my mom and my dad. My sister was in Tucson and the other one was in San Diego. So there you go. Part of what we've tried to do with the logistics section is to paint a picture of all the different things that can happen and needs to happen to support an older loved one through this stage in their lives. Many of those things are not face-to-face or something that needs to happen physically in real time with the older loved one. One of the things that I participated in was to use my conference call capabilities and got everybody on the phone. So Kimberly from Tucson, Dorian from San Diego, and the favorite aunt, Aunt Betty. We all got on the phone, and we all shared our thoughts and opinions. And using a conference call capability is one way to begin creating a team approach to the caregiving roles. Do you have other thoughts on how to engage siblings?
So I do have a couple. Every family is every family. And sometimes it's good if one person takes the lead, makes a plan, circulates that plan to everybody in advance, and gets a buy-in from everybody so that you're all on the same page with the conversation. If that's just not possible, I think there's an opportunity to hire a professional to actually engage in that conversation and to assume a mediator role.
That's right.
To try and facilitate something?
The geriatric care manager is one of the hot resources, and I encourage you to check if you or your spouse is working. It could be an employer benefit. It's worth checking. Charlene, explain what that is, because I think that is one of the best resources available. But it can be costly. That's why I say check with your employer.
So I'm a geriatric care manager, and I live in Massachusetts, and so if you're a Massachusetts fan, you'll get this reference. If you're not, I'll substitute another name. But I consider myself the Tom Brady of I'm a quarterback. I help you try and figure out what you need, when you need it, who are the people on the field, how to call the plays, and help you figure out how to get through this in any way that you need to have it done. So I help you with basically I'm working on the offense, the defense, the safety teams. I'm a big football fan. And I think the reality is there's just so much to know. And so I can help you with that, and that's what my job is.
But let's be specific. So what might you do?
So I can give you three top areas. So one.
And who are you working for? The older loved one or the caregiver? Both, or one or the other?
So in many cases, I'm hired by the child of or the spouse to try and figure out what the person in their life needs right now. Can they stay at home? If they can stay at home, what does that look like? What type of care do they need? In the second instance, they're looking to find the right person to come in and to let that person continue to live a full life, to be able to go on vacations, to still participate in a chorus, to buy a car.
Well, and it's funny. A friend of mine used an a geriatric care manager. They lived in New York City. Mom lived in Kansas City, was coming out of the hospital on Thursday. They couldn't get there till the weekend. And by one phone call and engaging a geriatric care manager, they were able to facilitate the whole process of getting Mom out of the hospital, into the home, getting in-home care providers to care for her until I could arrive. And then once I got there, they were then able to say, look, your mom just had surgery on her hip. She's got early stages dementia. These are the things we can do to the house to make sure she's safe for now. You'll also want to access Meals on Wheels. This is the number. And they basically make it possible to do what needs to be done on behalf of the older loved one. They know the resources. They know who to call. And in many cases, they have relationships with some of the service providers. So this ability to have an individual advocate work with you, or it could be your older loved one that's accessed the geriatric care manager, it's an important resource, and it's one that can also facilitate the use of siblings as well.
Absolutely. I think you said that better than I could. Thank you.
Well, but here's another question we're getting at. You talked about, and it's the holidays. The holidays is when elder care bubbles up because we go home for Thanksgiving, or we're going home for Christmas, or we're going there the day after, and Mom did or did not make that delicious relish we love, and you begin to wonder, did she forget or does she not know how? You open the refrigerator and it smells, and your mom, who usually is dressed to the nines, is only dressed to the fours. I mean, no judgment, but clearly things are changing. So you talked, Charlene, as we prepared for this webinar, for this visiting checklist. Mm-hmm. What did you mean, and where can they access it?
So it's at the end of these slides, I believe.
It's in the resource.
It's in the resource. Sorry, it's in the resource widget. Sorry about that. And the title is, things have changed, and it's really more of a guide than a scary document, and it's just things to look for when you go to your parents' house or your loved one's house. So it's taking a look at go in the refrigerator. If it's normally, if you know that your loved one always buys food and you can't wait to get to their house because you're going to open the refrigerator and it's going to be, 6 types of whipped cream and 4 types of chocolate pudding, and there's none of that, ask, hey, I was looking forward to this. Did you have a problem going to the grocery store? Conversely, if somebody never has food in the refrigerator, and now there's takeout containers from all over the place, but it's they're going bad, have a conversation. Are you not cooking anymore? This just seems like completely different for you. Take a look at the car. If your loved one is still driving, is the car in pristine condition? Is the car got a number of dents? And those are the top, two things that I would look at, as well as mobility. I think that's the third thing I would want to say. Actually, I'm going to add one more. Mobility, are they still getting around the same way? And then medications, check to see that they're still taking the medications.
And you do that by going to the cabinet, opening it up.
Exactly.
It was prescribed November 1st, 40 tablets, and there's still 40 tablets in it, and it's November 29th.
Yes, exactly.
But the other piece to highlight is there is a checklist. And so Charlene and her group put together a one-pager that should go to all of your siblings and the next-door neighbor. It's a cheat sheet of the subtle things to take a look at. And if you see changes or if it's not like you thought it should be or has been in the past, that begins the opportunity to explore your potential caregiving role. And that's what it's all about. Because ultimately, our goal in this webinar was to give you plenty of insights, was to hear from Charlene, who, as I said, has decades of experience in this, but also to support you in your quest to support caregiving in moving the agenda forward. And by that, there's an older loved one. They're in this stage in their lives. What can you do differently, or can a sibling do to help that older loved one move forward in the stage in their lives so that they're living as happily and healthy and safely as heavenly possible and have their own personal sense of responsibility and abilities to take care of themselves if that's what's important, or their own ability to make decisions about how they want this stage in their lives to go. That's what's important, and your chats and questions were all good. Some of them were really tough, and we appreciate you sharing those. Charlene, closing comments, or should we turn it back to LaDonna?
I just wanted to say ask for help. There are a lot of resources out there. It really is important. You can't do this on your own. You really do need support for all of the different areas. And, if I can ask you to do anything is really to reach out and ask for help. I think that's how I'd like to end, and to say it's really been an honor to be here today and to talk to each of you. And if any of you ever need any help, I'm certainly happy to be a resource for you.
Yeah, I enjoyed this as well. Thanks, LaDonna, for inviting us both.
Yeah, well, thanks to both of you. Thanks to our special guest, Charlene New from Mature Caregivers, Senior Client Care Manager, and, of course, our own Andrea Wixbowles. Wonderful conversation, and also really great conversation in the chat. I want to shout out Karen, who said, "This was my support group. Thank you." So we really appreciate your comments. Okay. We'll do a summary of the chat and include that in your follow-up email. And speaking of that, some webinar extras. You will get an email within the next few days or so, a recording, link to watch or to listen to the recording. We'll also attach or link out to some of the resources, including the visiting checklist that was mentioned. And also, I just want to let you guys know, we have Bright Horizons has a podcast that's called The Work-Life Equation. There is a link to the podcast in the menu of widgets. And we are lucky enough to say that we have Andrea and Charlene, who are going to be recording a podcast episode right after this webinar to answer some additional questions that unfortunately we weren't able to get. So be on the lookout for that podcast episode next month. And finally, we would love to hear your feedback on the webinar today. So if you'd like to take a minute, please do take our survey. You can access it by clicking the teal widget button with a clipboard. We really do read every piece of feedback, so if you have something you'd like to share with us about today, please let us know. And so I just want to thank everyone again for participating, for joining today. Have a great rest of day, and actually this is the last family webinar of 2018 from Bright Horizons, so thank you for your participation, and we hope to see you again next year for more family webinars.